Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello! Welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good few weeks. It has been a minute since I made an episode, and there's very good reason for that. I was directing a play, and things were just insanely busy at the theater. But we made it through, and the performances and the play are over now. But then, as soon as I was finished the play, I got a phone call from the hospital telling me that a date had opened up to have surgery done on my foot. And if you know anything about the healthcare system in Canada, it's wonderful. But there is quite a wait sometimes for different types of surgeries. So when you get a call saying, we have a date that's opened up, you take it. So I am just coming off of 2.5 weeks of rest. The surgery was nothing major, don't panic. It was just having a fibroma removed from the tendon in my foot. My stitches come out tomorrow, so by the time the next episode comes out, I will be back running around like crazy at the theater and everywhere else. I have missed you, and I have missed doing these episodes. When I found out I was having the surgery, I thought that I would be able to get a few episodes researched and written up while I was convalescing, but it didn't really happen. There was a lot of pain meds involved and a lot of pain, and so I just took the 2 weeks and relaxed. But I'm back now. Well, that's about it for my little corner of Ontario. Let's get the business out of the way, shall we? If you like this episode or any episode, please head on over to the Patreon page and give the show some love. For less than a theater ticket, you can help me continue bringing you episodes each week. You can also support the show on Spotify, and don't forget to give the show a 5-star review over on Apple. Apparently, it helps the show in the algorithm, which is something, as you know, I will never understand. Like, follow, and share the show on whatever platform you're listening to. Stop by our Facebook or YouTube page and leave a comment or share a post with everyone you know or don't know for that matter. Everyone is welcome here. Send a suggestion for a future episode or just drop a line and say hi at thebitterwitness@gmail.com. That's enough of the business. Let's get to this week's case. The dogs are sleeping behind me, so Puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Miley and Piper this week. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and relax as I tell you about the murder of Rhonda Smith. As always, I want to give the victims in this case top billing. Rhonda, and to all her family and loved ones, I acknowledge you and send my love to you wherever you may be. An individual devoid of social skills often finds themselves alienating those around them in certain situations, often due to their inability to navigate the nuanced landscape of human interaction. They habitually dominate discussions with self-focused monologues or contribute to breaking perceived awkward silences, sometimes offering unsolicited and tactless observations, or failing to grasp subtle cues like sarcasm or discomfort. People tend to dislike or avoid people who lack social skills because normally these interactions become draining, unpredictable, and ultimately unrewarding. It's difficult to form a genuine connection with someone who doesn't listen, empathize, offer basic politeness, or understand the unspoken rules of communication, leaving those around them feeling unheard, uncomfortable, and without a desire for continued engagement. Jealousy is a difficult emotion to process for those without the basic yet essential social skills, at times even impossible. as jealousy involves confronting and processing a potent cocktail of insecurity, comparisons, and, in most situations, perceived inadequacy. Jealousy is a vulnerable emotion, stirring up a primal fear of loss and a sense of not being enough, which can be incredibly uncomfortable for any person to take in, let alone a person lacking or devoid of basic social skills. Instead of acknowledging these underlying feelings, it's easier for the person to project those feelings outward, which more often than not leads to resentment, entitlement, rage, or possessiveness. Our case this week serves as a chilling example of the extreme consequences of what can happen when an individual devoid of these abilities to process negative feelings in a healthy manner attaches themselves to an unsuspecting social group. We are going to church this week, friends. Specifically, the Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Judy Zellner arrived at Trinity Church on January 23, 2008, around noon. Judy was the cleaner, but also a member of the congregation. She loved her little church. They had pretty much a great group of people who, for the most part, enjoyed empowering each other. When she got to the doors of the church, she realized that the doors had been left unlocked. She made a mental note to bring that up in a discussion with the pastor. Even though the quaint little church was in the country, that wouldn't stop someone desperate to steal from getting inside and ransacking the building. Something you should know about Judy is she is a true crime junkie, just like us. Naturally, when she finds that door open, her mind starts working double time. As Judy enters the church, she makes her way to the church office, and of course she is on high alert because, there could be a serial killer inside the church, there could be a burglar, there could be, God knows what or who could be inside that church. Because the way we bitters always go, right to the supernatural side of things when we don't see physical bodies. But sadly, this wasn't a supernatural thing, or a simple thing like someone forgetting to lock the door when they left. When Judy entered the office, she saw a bloodied body on the floor. And the body was so completely soaked in blood, and I mean soaked, that Judy couldn't even tell who was laying on the floor. The body had been shot twice in the head. Judy's bitter crime junkie instincts immediately kicked in, and her brain started screaming, "Touch nothing. Get out now." Judy, realizing that whoever did this could possibly still be inside the church, grabbed the cordless phone and ran outside to the parking lot and dialed 911. Perfect. Exactly what you were supposed to do when you find a dead body. 1, keep your shit together. 2, don't touch anything, and get the fuck out and lock yourself in your car until the police arrive. Judy, you're a rock star, girl. Police and paramedics arrived at the church quickly, and it was a good thing they did because when they approached the body, the paramedics were able to locate a faint heartbeat on the victim. The victim was still alive, but barely. Which I guess Judy could have checked to see if the person was still alive, but honestly, if the heartbeat was as faint as what it was reported to be, chances are Judy wouldn't have felt it. Judy, you did the right thing, girl. You got help there as fast as you could. The paramedics quickly loaded the person up on a stretcher and rushed them out to the ambulance in the parking lot. As they were loading the body into the back of the ambulance, Judy was talking with police officers, telling them everything she did and what she touched, if anything. They're asking her the usual standard questions. When did you get here? Why are you here? And do you know who the victim is? And of course, with all the blood, Judy had no clue who the person was. But then, just as they were about to load the body into the ambulance, the victim's head turned to the side, and Judy screamed, "Oh my God, that is Rhonda." Rhonda is Rhonda Smith, a 42-year-old woman who is a member of the congregation at Trinity Church, and at that specific time was the interim church secretary. Rhonda was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, by the time she arrived at the hospital, she was brain dead. Her parents, Jim and Dot, made the agonizing decision to take their daughter off of life support. So let's take a little look at who Rhonda Smith was. Rhonda Lynn Smith was born on January 17, 1966, to Jim and Dot Smith. This murder happened just 6 days after her birthday. Rhonda had dreamed of becoming a teacher, and in her late teens and 20s, Rhonda started pursuing that dream. She attended college. Sadly, this was about the same time that Rhonda started struggling with mental illness. She was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and as a result of that, she had a very hard time with day-to-day things like holding down a job, keeping a roof over her head, and food on the table. The main thing was that she wouldn't be able to become a teacher. According to Judy Zellner, Rhonda was a really nice person, and everyone in the church loved her. In fact, the women of the congregation had just had a birthday party for Rhonda to celebrate her birthday. But other than the little that Judy told about Rhonda, the police still needed to figure out who Rhonda was and who would have wanted to hurt her. The police decided to start looking where she was found, inside the church. They sat down with the pastor of the church, Greg Sheaves. Pastor Greg came to the position of pastor a little later in life than most. He graduated only in 2005 from the Lutheran Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Prior to that, he had had a successful career as a golf pro. He was, according to the women in his congregation, handsome and single. Apparently, he was also an extremely kind man, not in a creepy way, in a genuine way. Pastor Greg loved his congregation and tried to help as many of his members as he possibly could. Rhonda had only been a member of the church for approximately 2 years at the time of her death, and during that time, Pastor Greg had become quite close to Rhonda, but not in a sexual or relationship way, but in a pastor and congregate way. Pastor Greg had been supporting Rhonda through her struggles, and it was Pastor Greg who had suggested that Rhonda take the interim secretary position to help her out with her bills. You see, Rhonda had lived with her parents most of her life, but she was really trying to make an effort to not be a burden on her parents. The congregation admired this. And so, with Pastor Greg leading the way, the congregation was able to raise money to help Rhonda pay her bills and keep food on her table. They raised $3,000 about 2 weeks before her murder. In fact, just the Sunday before she was killed, Rhonda had stood up in front of the congregation to thank everyone for everything they had done for her and for welcoming her into their congregation with such a level of acceptance, even though many in the church knew the daily struggles that she fought. Rhonda's illness would often throw her into deep bouts of depression, which would lead Rhonda to suicidal ideation. But since being accepted into this church family, Rhonda had been working really hard to maintain and keep the depression at bay. And the members of the church had been supporting her with daily check-ins and inviting her to different events and just making her feel welcomed and loved. Rhonda's parents were also members of the church, and so many members supported not only Rhonda, but Jim and Dot as well. This family, the Smith family, was loved by Trinity Church. Initially, after learning of Rhonda's struggles with bipolar disorder, law enforcement thought that perhaps Rhonda's death was a suicide. But Rhonda had been shot twice in the head, and there was no gun found anywhere inside the church. After confirming that Judy hadn't seen a gun or moved a gun, the police quickly ruled out the theory of suicide. I mean, seriously, no one, and I mean no one, is going to shoot themselves in the head twice, then drive down the road, toss a gun out, and then drive back to the church so they could be found inside the office? Now, I'm not saying it's totally impossible for someone to take their own life by shooting themselves twice in the head and missing all the major whatevers in the brain that will kill you instantly, but not in this case. As well, once the police received the autopsy, the suicide theory was completely squashed, and they knew they were dealing with a murder. Rhonda had stippling of gunpowder on her hands, and the pattern of the stippling suggested that at the time of the gunfire, Rhonda had had her hands up in a defensive position, so they weren't holding a gun. The police began to wonder if this had perhaps been a robbery of some sort, and Rhonda had walked in on it and was killed to silence a witness, to make sure she couldn't identify them, something like that. Police began talking with more members of the church, and there was nothing that really stood out in terms of strangers hanging around the church, maybe attending a service to scope out the place, and there wasn't any evidence of a break-in. There wasn't anything missing from the church or from Rhonda's belongings. Police were really kind of stumped. Police decided to go back to Pastor Greg and ask him again if anyone would have had an issue with Rhonda in the church. Anyone who would have hated her enough to want to hurt her. But Pastor Greg was at a loss for who would have wanted to hurt Rhonda in any way. And then the police changed their tactic a little bit and asked Pastor Greg if there was anyone in his congregation who stood out to him, anyone who acted in a weird or strange manner, or perhaps is just an outcast from the other members of the congregation. Immediately, Pastor Greg was able to give them a name. Mary Jane Fonder. Mary Jane Fonder had been a member of the congregation for a long time, like 20 years' time. And well, let's just say Mary Jane had some issues. She was in her 60s, and even though she had been a member for all those years, she really didn't have any friends in the church. She was just one of those women who didn't shut up. No matter what the subject of conversation was about, she would always turn it so that it was all about her. You know exactly what kind of person I am talking about. We all know someone like this. People of the congregation were nice to Mary Jane, but only while they were at church. She was that person that you would be nice to while you are inside the walls of a church, but the minute you get outside the doors, you are running for your car and praying that she doesn't follow you and want to talk. One of her lawyers described her as the aunt that you don't want to sit beside at family dinners. I would just like to say to all my aunts and great aunts, living and deceased, that not one of you were any aunt that I would not want to sit beside at a family dinner. I will always sit beside you. I just had to throw that in so that in case they're listening. Mary Jane was born and raised in West Philadelphia. On the playground where she spent most of her days. Sorry, I could not help myself. And she had a good childhood. 2 loving parents, Edward III and Alice Fonder. Mary Jane had a brother, Edward IV. Edward number 3 was a machinist, and her mom Alice was a proofreader, which is kind of one of my dream jobs. I would love that so much. Get to read all the books before they come out. Oh, love it. When Mary Jane was 8 years old, her parents bought a house on some land, about 60 acres, in Springfield Township. And when they retired, that is where the family moved to, which is what brought the family to Trinity Church. I know I said that Mary Jane had a good childhood, and she did, but she was always that kid, that was kind of the outcast. No one really wanted to be her friend because Mary Jane was like awkward. She didn't understand social cues, and because of that, her behavior just pushed the other kids away from her. This lack of social awareness, shall we say, started causing Mary Jane all sorts of mental health issues when she hit high school. To the point that she actually tried to take her own life by overdosing on medication. When Mary Jane overdosed, she was placed in a mental institution for a while. When she was released, she tried to go back to high school, but she had a really hard time. According to some reports that I found, the kids in school bullied her relentless because she had tried to kill herself. She just couldn't make the social aspects of high school work for her. So eventually, she just dropped out. And can I just say, fuck those kids? You have to be the lowest form of scum to bully someone for trying to end their life. Man, that is just sick. We had kids that had all sorts of mental health issues and drug issues and crap like that, even when I was in high school way back in the 80s and 90s. But we never... Wait, let me just say, the kids I hung out with, at least, would never bully or make fun of someone for trying to take their own life. Again, fuck those kids. I hope you turned out butt ugly when you grew up. Once Mary Jane had dropped out of high school, she had to find work. And over the next several years, she held down various jobs, but none of the jobs really ever lasted long because she could not get along with anyone. And her social awkwardness and inability to read a room just led to her losing the jobs. She worked at a ceramic studio, department stores, knitting factories, and she was even a punch card operator at the J.P. Lippincott publishing company. And I looked this up because I wasn't sure what a punch card operator was. This would have been during the 60s or 70s. A punch card operator would have been like a data recorder. There weren't computers back then, so punch card operators would record things like payroll on these really stiff pieces of cardboard, and they would punch holes in to mark spots on the cardboard. It would have been a cool job, but Mary Jane just couldn't hold down any job for long. In Mary Jane's case, when she couldn't fit in, she would turn to rage, and from what I found, for most of these jobs that she had, she was always let go or asked to leave because of inappropriate interactions with coworkers. As well, Mary Jane didn't begin dating until she was in her late 30s. And, well, let's just say that was a train wreck. These dates weren't like hookups. She would go out to dinner or a movie with someone, and that would be the end of it. Once she would open her mouth, the dates would run for the hills. So, no serious relationships, sexual, romantic, or otherwise, no long-term employment for Mary Jane. In 1987, as her parents were aging, Mary Jane decided to move back in with them and help care for them. Mary Jane at this point is 45, which kind of sucks because at 45 you should be living your best life and not moving back in with mom and dad. But let's not give her props for sacrificing her life to go take care of mom and dad, because I don't know if you've guessed yet, but Mary Jane Fonder is a shit snake. In 1992, her mom, Alice, had to have her leg amputated because of circulation issues. Unfortunately, the surgery didn't go well, and Alice slipped into a coma. And after 4 months in the coma, Alice passed away at the age of 80. Since moving back in with her parents, Mary Jane had been getting quite upset at church because, well, she was never included in anything. The ladies of the church would purposely not invite Mary Jane to events that were happening. For example, baby showers or birthday parties, things like that. Now look, I was raised in churches. I've worked for churches before, and even though you don't want to be around someone or you don't like them, you still have to invite them to things. I mean, there were lots of people I didn't like that were part of churches that I've interacted with in my life, and we always invited them to all the stuff, and then hoped like hell they didn't show, but we still invited them. And I know Mary Jane was annoying and weird, and no one liked her, and let's face it, she is a shit snake, but they should have at least extended an invite. But these church ladies are being very, churchy. One of the main reasons I don't go to church anymore is because out of all the shitbags and shit snakes I've come across in my life, no one was more hurtful, judgmental, and downright horrible than people who called themselves Christians. But that is a story for another time. While Mary Jane is being rebuffed by the ladies of the church, she starts turning her attention towards Pastor Greg. In fact, she starts developing a huge crush on Pastor Greg. Remember, Mary Jane has never really had a serious romantic relationship. I want you to picture this. Never had friends, plagued with mental health issues, no social skills at all, never had a sexual or long-term romantic partner, and isn't really able to find her people, even in a church. And now, at like 45-ish years old, she develops a hardcore crush on Pastor Greg. You so know she is about to go all Alex Forrest from Fatal Attraction on his ass. Watch your bunny rabbits, Greg. But Pastor Greg did not feel the same way about Mary Jane. And I just want to make it very clear that Pastor Greg never crossed any lines with any members of his congregation. As far as I could find, he was a wonderful pastor for the church and really cared about his members' well-being. So because of the crush, Mary Jane starts volunteering a lot around the church. She joined absolutely everything she could because of this crush she was holding on Pastor Greg. She was in the choir, she would run art classes for the kids, all sorts of things. And then, one day, she crosses the line from just having feelings for Pastor Greg to actually coming out and telling Pastor Greg about what she's been thinking about. And trigger warning, this next little bit is cringy and awkward and ugh. One day, after choir practice, Mary Jane goes up to Pastor Greg and looks deep into his eyes and says, You can't deny what is happening between us. Okay, first of all, that is a bold move. Like, bold. I have never had the cojones to do something like that. And second of all, Pastor Greg is a freaking saint. Instead of angrily rebuffing Mary Jane, he very nicely informs Mary Jane that he doesn't feel the same way about her and that he is her pastor, and that is all. Mary Jane is pissed because the entire time that she was building this huge infatuation for Pastor Greg, she wholeheartedly believed that Pastor Greg was getting the exact same feelings for her. And now, when she gets slapped with a big old backhand of reality, she decides that Pastor Greg is just like all the other assholes in her church who don't invite her to things and basically make her be an outcast. Basically, Mary Jane is fucking delusional at this point. Pastor Greg very nicely deals with Mary Jane and immediately calls a meeting of the church board or board of elders or whatever it is they call it. And he tells the board that he has just had this interaction with Mary Jane and he wants to make sure that the board understands that this is not something that he is interested in pursuing. He is uncomfortable with it, but he feels that he has dealt with it. Good on Pastor Greg. He did exactly the right thing, and if I was him, I would have been terrified of this bitch. Like I said earlier, Alex Forrest. So not long after this little confession of love and backhand of reality happens between Pastor Greg and Mary Jane all of a sudden forgives Pastor Greg and decides that he was just playing hard to get. She starts to call him on the phone. Not just once in a while. She starts calling him like twice a day, every day. And the first couple of times she called, she kept him on the phone for hours. Eventually, Pastor Greg just stopped answering his phone and letting the calls go to voicemail. And she would leave rambling messages on his answering machine, like 15, 20-minute messages just talking about the church, talking about herself, talking about anything and everything, and it was just creepy. And this is after he has just told her, there is nothing between us. I do not have feelings for you at all. Basically, Mary Jane has now tipped over from socially awkward weirdo into psycho stalker territory. And it only got worse from there. When she wasn't getting the hint that Pastor Greg didn't want to have any interaction with her by not returning any of her calls, she started coming to his house and leaving food for him. Not just leaving food, she would just enter his house when he wasn't there and set his table and have dinner on the table for Pastor Greg and then leave like some psycho little house elf. At this point, Pastor Greg is completely freaked out by all this. So he goes to Mary Jane and he tells her to stop with the food. Stop coming in his home, stop bringing food, stop touching his dishes. And he actually starts to lock his door. He had never locked his door prior to Mary Jane going all psycho on him. And I would just like to say that you couldn't pay me enough money to even take one bite of anything that this shit snake put on his table. I'm positive that at this point in time, Mary Jane probably had a basement all set up to keep him locked up and play with him and dress him up in Ken clothes. Nope, no, don't eat the food. Even though Pastor Greg had told Mary Jane to stop bringing food to his house and stop calling him and he started locking his doors, Mary Jane doesn't stop. She just leaves the food on the porch for him. Pastor Greg calls another meeting of the church board of elders and tells them what she's doing and that he has told her to stop, and it's all making him very uncomfortable and unsafe. He told them that he had very clearly, with short, small words, explained to Mary Jane that there is never and will never be a relationship between the two of them. I mean, this is a good strategy. Always tell someone when you have a shit snake putting food in your freezer and leaving it on your porch, because if you go missing, they know whose house to point the police at. But I don't understand why the elders of the church didn't step in and do something. Their pastor is telling them that he is having a problem. While all this crap is going on with Mary Jane, Rhonda had been a member of the church for about 2 years, and she had been completely accepted by the members of the church. They loved her. Rhonda is invited to all the events, and don't forget, they raised all this money for her to help her pay her bills. All this stuff. They're calling her. They're friends. And then one night after choir practice, Mary Jane sees that the ladies of the church are staying behind and setting up for a get-together. And once again, she hasn't been invited to it. So Mary Jane drives past the church a couple times to see what is going on, and she sees Rhonda's car in the parking lot and realizes that this get-together that's happening at the church is actually a birthday party for Rhonda. Mary Jane is pissed because Rhonda was able to do in 2 years what she couldn't do in 20, and that was being accepted and making friends. Which Rhonda didn't set out to do. Rhonda was just a nice fucking person, and people liked her, unlike Mary Jane. On the Sunday after the birthday party for Rhonda, Mary Jane is sitting in the church. Pastor Greg is done his sermon, and he informs the members of the congregation that Rhonda would like to say something. Rhonda was extremely nervous about standing up in front of the congregation, but she wanted to thank them for all of the help and acceptance and love that they had given her in her 2 short years inside the church. And she especially wanted to thank them for the money that they had raised for her to help her pay her bills. And as Rhonda was delivering this thank you to the congregation, because she was nervous, she kept looking at Pastor Greg for reassurance. And Pastor Greg kept nodding and smiling at Rhonda to encourage her and try and make her feel comfortable. But inside Mary Jane's twisted mind, she interpreted those glances between Pastor Greg and Rhonda as a sexual relationship between Rhonda and Pastor Greg. And Mary Jane saw red, blood red. And as I said earlier, there was nothing going on between Rhonda and Pastor Greg, or Pastor Greg and any other member of the congregation. He was just a good pastor and trying to help and support the members of his congregation. Well, I should clarify, he was trying to help the members of his congregation who weren't psycho-stalking him and probably wanted to trap him in a cement room and use him as a play toy. The Sunday after the birthday party is the Sunday before Rhonda was killed. So we have now come full circle, and we are sitting at January 23rd, 2008, and Judy Zellner has just found Rhonda dying on the floor of the church office, shot in the head twice. After Pastor Greg gave the police Mary Jane Fonder's name, the police start looking into Mary Jane's background. And they discover that she was actually a suspect in the disappearance of her 80-year-old father, Edward No. 3, back in 1993. According to the reports that I found, Edward No. 3 had a really hard time with mobility. He apparently used a cane to walk, and he was quite frail. He had a heart condition that he had to take medication for, and he was suffering from diabetes. Now, the details of Edward III's disappearance are sketchy at best. Most of the accounts that I found were Mary Jane's accounts. Remember, Mary Jane's mother had passed away in 92, and according to Mary Jane, since her mother's passing, she and her father had had a tumultuous relationship. Mary Jane claimed that it was because he was in a deep state of depression from losing his wife, and he was angry with Mary Jane. And this is gonna blow your mind, because this is what she told the police. According to Mary Jane, her father, Edward number 3, was angry with her, Mary Jane, because at some point, some elderly cousins had come to stay at the Fonder home for a visit. And one night during dinner, these cousins started yelling at Mary Jane for the way she ate chicken. That's right, you heard me, the way she ate her chicken. And apparently, again, according to Mary Jane, her father had agreed with the cousins and started coming down on Mary Jane and just did not stop hating her until he disappeared. Listen, I couldn't make this shit up if I tried. Let's look at the day of Edward number 3's disappearance. And we need to remember that all this information is from Mary Jane herself. So take it with a giant fucking salt mine. According to Mary Jane, on the morning of her father's disappearance, she woke up and made his breakfast like she did every morning. Then she went back to bed. While she was in bed, she claims she heard the front door of the house open, and she assumed her father was going out to get the newspaper. Mary Jane claims that she fell asleep and woke up at around 11 a.m. and found that her father wasn't inside the house. Mary Jane then called the police and reported her father missing. Police arrived and they did this ginormous search for Edward number 3. They didn't find anything, not a single trace of him anywhere on the Fonder property. And remember, this is a huge property that the Fonders had. It was 60 acres. That's a pretty big plot of land. I need to stop for a second before we go any further. Could someone please tell me how a frail 80-year-old man who walks with a cane, has a heart condition, and suffers from diabetes could manage to leave his house and wander off, leaving no trace in, say, 2 or 3 hours? It's not like he's running like Flojo around a track. Rest in peace, Flojo. Okay, number 1, even if he was able to walk for 2 or 3 hours straight, the average person would only be able to cover like 6 to 8 miles, according to the magic Google box. Edward number 3, with his 80-year-old body and a cane and a heart condition and diabetes, at most might make 2 or 3 miles, and that's being generous. But I seriously doubt that he would be physically able to walk for 2 straight hours, so he wouldn't even make it the 2 to 3 miles. He would have either just made it just off the property or would have still been on the property somewhere. And number 2, if he passed out or fell over, which I think he most likely would have from exhaustion at the very least, he would have been found right away. Hell, Mary Jane could have found him before the police arrived at the house, if she even bothered to look for him. And who the hell goes back to bed when you are the caregiver for an elderly person? I mean, I could see, making their breakfast and laying back on the couch while they ate their breakfast or resting in a chair or something. But really, Mary Jane? Really? Go back to bed until 11? I honestly would be too scared to go back to bed in case they needed me for something. Once I had them settled in for a while, doing something like a puzzle or watching TV, I might go to bed for a nap for a bit. And you just know that she made something gross for that poor man for breakfast, if she even made him anything at all. While the police are out searching for Edward number 3 on the property, some of the officers decide to search the house. And according to a few reports that I found, the Fonders were hoarders, like bad hoarders. No judgment here. While the police are looking for Edward number 3 inside the house, they come across a deep freeze. And inside the freezer, they find a dog wrapped inside a sheet, frozen solid. Before you jump to a giant conclusion, which your giant conclusion is probably right, I just want to say this. When you are going to have an animal taxidermied, it has to be frozen solid through and through before the process can begin. So any taxidermist will tell you to stick the animal in a deep freeze for a month or more before bringing it to them. And the reason I know this is because I was going to have my beloved Siamese cat Blue taxidermied. And when I called the taxidermist when Blue passed away, they told me to put him in a garbage bag and put him in the freezer for a month. And I did. But then I couldn't bring myself to have it done, and I ended up burying him by a river. But that said, police took the dog that they found inside Mary Jane's freezer to a vet and had a necropsy done. And it turns out the dog had died from an overdose of insulin. So immediately, police were suspicious of Mary Jane, thinking that she had experimented on the dog to see if giving a high dose of insulin would kill something, and it did. Unfortunately, to this day, there has never been a trace of Edward number 3. And Mary Jane was never charged or convicted in her father's disappearance. Once the police had found out all this backstory about Mary Jane, they decided to bring her in for some questioning about Rhonda's murder. Once Mary Jane got inside that interrogation room, that bitch started talking and just didn't stop. She talked about everything from the pimple on her ass to the members of her church. She flapped her gums for 4 hours inside that room. I feel so sorry for the detective that pulled that interrogation. Eventually, when the detective could get a word in, they asked her if she owned a gun. Mary Jane said yes, she used to. A .38 revolver, which is what was used to murder Rhonda. But Mary Jane tells the police that 14 years earlier, she had gotten rid of the gun by throwing it into Lake Macmillan, which is a lake that is about a 15-minute drive from Trinity Church. Mary Jane tells the detectives that the reason she threw it in the river was because she didn't want to own a gun anymore. You smell that? That's a big old pile of shit snake bullshit right there. Police then ask Mary Jane where she was when Rhonda was killed, and she informs them that she had a hair appointment at 11:30 on the day that Rhonda was killed. So this next part is really weird, and maybe I'm just being a catty bitch because I hate Mary Jane Fonda. Whatever. But Mary Jane wore wigs a lot. Now, there is nothing wrong with wearing wigs. They're fun. You can pretend to be another person when you wear them. But Mary Jane's wig was almost identical to her own hair. Like, what? It was literally the same color and same style. She would cover her hair with a wig that was exactly the same as her hair. And personally, I just think that's weird. I don't get it. And Mary Jane would go to the hairdresser and have her real hair done and then put the wig on over top. I don't get it. Please explain it to me, anyone. Police go out and they look for the gun in the lake, but they don't find it. So then they go to Mary Jane's hairdresser and check there. And in fact, Mary Jane had been there for her 11:30 appointment on the day that Rhonda was murdered. In fact, according to the hairdresser, Mary Jane arrived at the salon at 11:22. I don't understand how this hairdresser could be that precise, but apparently, according to one report I read, there was some kind of a sign-in sheet with time at the salon, which is really weird. Interestingly enough, the police were able to tell from the computer in the church office that Rhonda had been active online until about 10:55 a.m. that morning. So that meant that the chances are that Rhonda was shot sometime between 10:55 and just before 12 o'clock when Judy Zellner arrived at the church and found her. So with Mary Jane arriving at her hair appointment at 11:25-ish, there was enough time for her to stop at the church, shoot Rhonda, and make her way to the salon to get her hair done. And while the police are talking with the hairdresser at the salon, the hairdresser casually mentions that Mary Jane had accidentally left her wig at the salon that day and still hadn't come back to pick it up. Police immediately took the wig into evidence and sent it out to be tested for gunpowder, blood, whatever. But unfortunately, the wig came back clean. No gunpowder, no specks of blood, nothing on the wig. Police are at a loss, so they decide that they are going to collect all of the condolence cards and letters that Rhonda's parents received during and around the time of Rhonda's funeral, and just take a look through them, see if anything pops out at them. And this is just so weird. Mary Jane sent out condolence letters to literally everyone. Pastor Greg, members of the choir, members of the church, Rhonda's parents. But these weren't normal condolence letters. These were rambling letters that stated how sorry Mary Jane was that Rhonda was gone, and then followed by pages and pages of me. The letters didn't really give the police any more evidence regarding Rhonda's murder, but they did kind of solidify their suspicions of Mary Jane. As well, after the funeral, Mary Jane started getting really weird with Rhonda's parents. She started bringing them food and pies and treats all the time. And then she would visit with them in their house for way too long. She just wouldn't leave. She would sit there with them, talking about herself for hours. Then Mary Jane starts sitting with Jim and Dot, Rhonda's parents, in church. It's creepy. Maybe even if Mary Jane had been a friend of Rhonda's, it wouldn't be so creepy for Mary Jane to sit with Jim and Dot, but that wasn't the case. Rhonda's parents, Jim and Dot, they were bloody saints. They were so tolerating of Mary Jane overstaying her welcome, and this just blows my mind. One day, during one of Mary Jane's extended visits at their home, Dot noticed that Mary Jane's shoes were wearing through. So Dot offered a few pairs of Rhonda's shoes to Mary Jane to replace the ones that were falling apart. So Mary Jane takes these shoes and starts wearing them all the time. Still, even with all this information implicating Mary Jane and all her weird and creepy behavior, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest and charge Mary Jane with Rhonda's murder. And then one day, a father and son decided to go fishing on the shores of Lake Macmillan. And you know how kids are. They get bored sitting, waiting for a fish to bite, and they start to explore. So the son starts exploring in the shore of the lake, and guess what he finds a little further down from where his dad is casting a line? A loaded .38 caliber revolver. Oh my God, could you imagine that poor dad seeing his kid bringing him back a loaded fucking gun that he found on the shores? I can't even. What if the kid didn't know what it was and had accidentally pulled the trigger and killed himself? The father and son take the gun directly to the police station, which is exactly what you are supposed to do with a gun that you find or want to get rid of. The police look at the gun and it is pristine. It is clean and it looks like it had just gone in the water the day before. It didn't look like a gun that had sat at the bottom of a lake for 14 years. So initially the police figured this wasn't Mary Jane's gun. But once they ran the serial number, guess what? It was Mary Jane's gun. The one she said she had chucked into Lake Macmillan 14 years earlier. Police sent the gun for forensic testing, and the testing came back that it was in fact the .38 caliber that was used to murder Rhonda Smith. On April 1st, 2008, about 4 months after Rhonda Smith was murdered, Mary Jane Fonda was arrested for the murder of Rhonda Smith. And naturally, of course, Mary Jane denied murdering Rhonda, but nobody believed her. During the trial, Mary Jane's lawyer tried to convince the jury that it was actually Mary Jane's brother, Edward No. 4, who killed Rhonda. But Mary Jane's lawyer didn't really have any evidence or reason for Edward No. 4 wanting to kill Rhonda. Mary Jane's lawyer also tried to convince the jury that Rhonda had committed suicide by shooting herself in the head twice, then getting in her car, driving to Lake Macmillan, throwing in the gun, and then driving the 15 minutes back to Trinity Church and laying down on the office floor. I'm so surprised that theory wasn't immediately accepted by the jury. Luckily, it didn't work, because on October 30th, 2008, Mary Jane Fonda was found guilty of murdering Rhonda Smith and sentenced to life in prison. Mary Jane Fonda maintained her innocence for a long time. But then, after a few years in prison, she started giving interviews, and one was to Dateline. And it was during these interviews that this shitsnake finally admitted to murdering Rhonda. Mary Jane stated that she had no recollection of the killing, that she had suffered a psychotic break of some sort, and that she had killed Rhonda during this break. Sorry, Mary Jane, but setting up an insanity defense after the conviction isn't really going to do you any good. Of course, Mary Jane appealed her conviction several times, but she was never successful. Then, in one of her interviews, she stated that she loved being in prison. Mary Jane claimed that she had found her people, and that all the girls in prison called her Mom, and she believed that God had placed her in prison to help the women in prison find Jesus. Right. God made you murder Rhonda so you could be arrested and sent to prison so you can lead women in prison to Jesus. Nope, that's not how that works, you piece of shit. On June 4th, 2018, Mary Jane Fonda passed away at the age of 75 in a prison infirmary, which was a better way to die than what Rhonda Smith suffered. And that, my friends, is the case of the murder of Rhonda Smith. My thoughts. This case just absolutely burns my ass. Seeing how a life can be so senselessly taken and be excused by uncontrollable emotions. There are countless people in this world who have faced relentless bullying, who navigate life feeling awkward and struggling immensely to find their place, their people. Even those who grapple with extreme jealousy. And yet, for the vast majority, these profound difficulties, these internal battles, don't make them take someone else's life. They exercise control, they find healthier outlets, or they seek professional help. Mary Jane Fonda was a piece of selfish shit her entire life. Every thought that flew through her mind was based on how she could get something for herself. And the fact that she tried to claim that God placed her in prison so she could help the women there literally makes me want to puke. That shit snake was basically saying that she was meant to murder Rhonda and leave an unfillable hole in the Smith family's hearts. No, Mary Jane, you were 65 fucking years old when you made the conscious decision to take Rhonda's life. You absolutely knew what you were doing and that it was wrong. And you even went so far as to try and befriend Jim and Dot, Rhonda's parents, after you murdered their daughter. And you only did that to place yourself in a position that would benefit you, not because you genuinely felt bad for Jim and Dot. You, Mary Jane Fonda, were an absolute shit stain on this world. Nothing more than a cold-blooded killer who should have received the death penalty instead of life in prison. And I hope that wherever you are now in the afterlife, that you are cold and lonely and miserable. Rhonda knew that life is a gift, and it was precisely that understanding that fueled her fierce determination to fight so hard and better her own. Wow, this one stirred up some emotions for me. I just know the struggle that mental health issues can place on an entire family, not just the person suffering from the mental health issues. And when I see someone who is honestly just trying to make it day to day, and some asshole takes that away from them, it just sets me on fire. As Patterson says to me constantly, I need to calm my tits. Anyway, I'm back. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll continue to listen to my bitterness. And with that, I think we'll leave it there for this week. Stay safe, get your pap test done, and enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.